اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والذي يريكم البرق خوفا وطمعا وينشئ السحاب الثقال ويسبح الرعد بحمده والملائكة من خيفته ويرسل الصواعق فيصيب بها من يشاء وهم يجادلون في الله وهو شديد المحال. له دعوة الحق والذين يدعون من دونه لا يستجيبون لهم بشيء لا يستجيبون لهم بشيء إلا كباسط كفيه إلى الماء ليبلغ فاه وما هو ببالغه وما دعاء الكافرين إلا في ضلال. ولله يسجد من في السماوات والأرض طوعا وكرها وظلالهم بالغدو والآصال. صدق الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم.
Since it's a Thursday night, before we begin, let us recite a Surah Al-Fatiha for all the marhum mu'min and mu'minat who are no longer with us. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من شر الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سبحان الله والحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين والصلاة والسلام وتحية والإكرام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعلى آله وعترته وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم ومنكر فضائلهم وغاصب حقوقهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. الحمد لله الذي جعلنا من المتمسكين بولاية أمير المؤمنين وأبنائه المعصومين. أما بعد، قال الله عز وجل في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وكونوا مع الصادقين. صدق الله العلي العظيم. وصلوا على محمد وآله الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. Brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We're using this program, Thursday night program, to commemorate the Shahada, the martyrdom of our 11th Imam, Imam Abu Muhammad Hassan ibn Ali al-Zaki al-Askari alayhi afdalus salati was salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. Just a note that the actual Shahada martyrdom of our 11th Imam falls on Sunday, which would be Saturday night. However, in the interest of consolidating the programs, we are commemorating and honoring and remembering our 11th Imam in tonight's majlis. When we look at the life of our 11th Imam alayhi salam, we have discussed many times before in many of the programs the level of scrutiny and political interference that the Imam alayhi salam lived under. Indeed, he's the only Imam who was born in Samarra, lived his entire life in Samarra, and then as a Mazlum in his 20s, he became Shaheed in Samarra. And that itself is a Mazlumiyat that's difficult for us to appreciate, especially as we live in the 21st century, and how travel and going to different places and the ability to be mobile is something that we take for granted. Perhaps with this, this pandemic situation that we're all stuck at home and not being able to go anywhere, and in only 6 or 7 months, we have become very restless, and people are already starting to plan their vacations and travels after, inshallah, the pandemic is going to be over. But imagine living like this and under much more severe scrutiny, under much more severe house arrest for your entire life. From the moment that Imam Askari is born in the house of Imam Hadi alayhi salam in Samarra, where they were already under house arrest, till the moment that he became Shaheed, his entire life was like this. There was not a moment in the life of our 11th Imam where he was given any sort of respite, where he was given any sort of allowance. He's the only Imam of our infallibles who never was able to go for Hajj. Because how would he be able to go all the way to Medina if he never was able to even leave the city of Samarra? And so the main method of communication for the Imam and his followers was through letters. Because obviously when you don't have direct access to the Imam because of these political reasons, and secondly, the Imam was trying to get his followers ready for the period of his son, of the Ghaibat al-Sughra, which would begin with his Shahadat, whereby the only method of communication with the Imam would be through letters, through written correspondence. And so that's one of the reasons why the Imam used this as an opportunity, this political pressure and the fact that he was in house arrest and not able to communicate. He used this as an opportunity to prepare his followers, to teach them that things are going to become even more worse. They're going to become even more severe. And therefore, get used to this idea of communicating with the Hujjat of Allah, with the representative of God, through written communication. And that's what we see in the form of the tawqi'at, the tawqis, the letters of our 12th Imam during the period of Ghaibat al-Sughra, and some during Ghaibat al-Kubra as well. So the main method of communication of Imam Askari alayhi salam with his followers was through letters. Fortunately for us, many of these letters have been preserved. And so we can look at these letters of Imam Askari alayhi salam to give us advice and guidance and a peek into the time of Imam Askari alayhi salam and the circumstances in which our 11th Imam was living. There's a book called The Life of Imam Hassan al-Askari by Allama Sharif Baqir al-Qarashi, rahmatullah alayh, in which he has collected all the letters that are available to us from Imam Askari to his followers. Of course, that's not the only book that we have, but the reason I mentioned that book is because it's been translated in English. And so you can find all of these letters that Imam Askari alayhi salam wrote that have survived through the ages in this book by Allama Qarashi, who just passed away about 7 or 8 years ago, I believe. And all of these letters are available for us to read in English. So inshallah, we take that time to visit this resource, which is very valuable. It's a 400 or 500 page biography of Imam Askari alayhi salam, which contains his whole life from beginning to the end. But one of the things that he has a whole chapter on are the letters of Imam Askari alayhi salam. So what I'm hoping to do is to look at one of these letters and to see what our Imam alayhi salam was communicating with his followers, and what kind of advice, what kind of suggestions, what kind of nasihat, what message was the Imam alayhi salam given to his followers. So one of these letters is written by the Imam Askari alayhi salam to Abul Hasan Ali ibn al-Husayn al-Qummi, rahmatullah alayh. Abul Hasan Ali ibn Husayn al-Qummi, who is famously known as Ali ibn Babawayh al-Qummi, rahmatullah alayh. And by that name, we might be able to recognize that he is the father of the famous Sheikh Saduq, rahmatullah alayh. Sheikh Saduq, who compiled, among others, Man La Yahduru al-Faqih, which is considered one of the Kutub al-Arba, the 4 early books of compilations of hadith that we have, as well as Uyun Akhbar al-Rida and Ilal al-Shara'i and lots of other books. He was a very prolific author. But one of these books that were compiled by, so that Sheikh Saduq is, the father of Sheikh Saduq is Ali ibn Babawayh al-Qummi, and he was also a renowned scholar, and he was the wakil of Imam Askari alayhi salam in the city of Qum. So when we look at the letter, it begins in the standard form of a khutbah that you hear in lectures, and that's a standard template as a preamble that's used by the Prophet and by the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. He says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, praise be to God, wal aqibatu lil muttaqeen, that the salvation is for those who are God conscious, wal jannatu lil muwahhideen, paradise is for those who have firm faith in God, wal naru lil mulhideen, and hellfire is for those who have rejected God. Wala udwanun illa ala zalimeen, and you must not have enmity toward anyone except those who are oppressors. Wala ilaha illallah ahsanul khaliqeen, and there is no God besides Allah who is the best of creators. والصلاة على خير خلقه محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم وعطرته الطاهرين, and may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon the best of his creation, Prophet Muhammad صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم, and his purified progeny. Now the letter continues, and the Imam is addressing Ibn Babawayh al-Qummi, and the words are important. That's why I'm mentioning the exact Arabic. The Imam says, Usika, I advise you. So this is a letter of advice from the Imam to Ali ibn Babawayh al-Qummi, and subsequently at the end he actually does say, act upon this advice and pass this on to our Shias. So this is the advice of the Imam, not just to Ali ibn Babawayh al-Qummi, but for all of us today. He says, Usika ya Shaykhi wa mu'tamadi ya Abul Hasan Ali ibn al-Husayn al-Qummi. I give you this advice, O my Shaykh, you're my Shaykh, wa mu'tamadi, and you're my trustworthy person. Imagine the high status of a person when the Imam is referring to him as my Shaykh and my trustworthy person. وَفَّقَكَ اللَّهُ لِمَرْضَاتِهِ, may Allah guide you toward his pleasure. وَجْعَلْ مِنْ صَلْبِكَ أَوْلَادًا صَالِحِينَ بِرَحْمَتِهِ, and may Allah grant you children who will be righteous through his mercy. It's very important when we look at this advice. Not only is the Imam doing dua for Ibn Babawayh al-Qummi, but he's also emphasizing the importance of keeping our children on the right path when he says that may Allah give you children also. Not only are you my Shaykh and Mu'tamid, But I hope that Allah will give you children as well, and your children will be salihin, will be righteous as well. And then the Imam continues and gives the advice. So the first piece of advice that the Imam gives to him, Usika bi taqwallah. Advice number one, he says to Ibn Babi al-Qummi, and consequently to all of us, the first piece of advice from Imam Hassan al-Askari alayhi salam to his followers and to his Shias is taqwallah, is to have taqwa, is to be God conscious in our affairs. And indeed, this is the first piece of advice that any of the infallibles, any of the Ma'asumeen alayhimus salam have given in any situation. When we look at the wasiyat, the famous last will of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Ali alayhi salatu wassalam, in his last wasiyat, in his last will, the very first piece of advice that even Imam Ali alayhi salam gives us is to be God conscious, is to have taqwallah. Usikum bi taqwallah. I give you advice to always be God conscious in your affairs. And we know the idea of taqwa, what taqwa means, to be aware of the presence of Allah, to know that Allah is always watching me in all of my actions. Whenever I'm about to do something, the first thought in my mind should be, is Allah razi with this? Is Allah pleased with this act of mine? Is this act in disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And that's why we say that taqwa is the foundation of everything else, because if there's no taqwa, then it doesn't really matter how many good deeds and how many amal salih we perform. Our good deeds are wasted and ruined on the day of judgment if we don't have taqwa, if we don't stay away from the maharim, if we don't stay away from the things which have been made haram by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's the idea of taqwa, that innama yataqabbalullahu minal muttaqeen. Surely Allah only accepts the good deeds of those who are muttaqeen. Allah will accept the good deeds of those who have taqwa, meaning those who are conscious of the presence of God in every moment of their life, and therefore that taqwa prevents them from committing sins. That's the very first advice of Imam Askari, is that we should have taqwa, taqwallah. Number two, the Imam says, wa iqamis salat. My second piece of advice to you is establishing prayer. It's interesting, the Quran doesn't talk about doing prayer. The Quran always talks about iqamis salat, which means to establish prayer. And there's a difference. Doing prayer is when I do my namaz and that's it. But iqamis salat, establishing of prayer, means to make those circumstances happen in order for prayer to become a thing. Right? Doing prayer versus paving the path, paving the road in order for prayer to become established by myself, by my family, by my children, by those around me, by my community, by others. And that's where we see in the dua of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, Rabbi ja'alni muqimas salati. Oh Allah, make me among those who, not those who do namaz. Rabbi ja'alni muqimas salati. Oh Allah, make me among those who establish prayer. And going back to the dua of the Imam for Ibn Babi al-Qummi, same thing we see in the dua of Prophet Ibrahim. He doesn't stop there. He doesn't just say, Rabbi ja'alni muqimas salah. Oh Allah, make me among those who establish prayer. Wa min dhurriyati. The Quran continues. Oh Allah, make me among those who establish prayer, and my children also be among those who establish prayer. So the second piece of advice of the Imam to his followers is iqamis salat, is that we establish prayer, not just perform prayer, but make those circumstances happen in order for prayer to become a tradition, in order for prayer to become a routine, in order for prayer to just become part of our lifestyles and our routines and our daily existence. The third piece of advice that the Imam gives is, he says, وَإِيتَاءِ الزَّكَاةِ, and give in charity. فَإِنَّهُ لَا تَقْبَلُ الصَّلَاةُ مَنْ مَانِعِ الزَّكَاةِ. The Imam says, give charity, because prayer of the person, we just talked about establishing prayer, now the Imam says that prayer will not be accepted from the person who does not give in charity. Right? In whatever capacity we can, there are needy mu'mineen here in our own community. We do these projects where we distribute food to needy people in the community. As much as we can, wherever we can, whether it's locally, whether it's overseas, whether it's our distant family members, others, the sadat, the scholars, we give in charity as much as we can. The next thing that the Imam mentions, وَأُوصِيكَ بِمَغْفِرَةِ الذَّنْبِ. Ask for forgiveness of your sins. Why should we always be asking for forgiveness of our sins? I didn't do any sins today. Alhamdulillah, I had a good day. I didn't do anything haram. We know that the Prophet ﷺ, he would say istighfar, astaghfirullah rabbi wa atubu ilayh 100 times, several times during the day. The Prophet wouldn't just say astaghfar once or a few times during the day. He would do a tasbih, 100 times astaghfar recitation, several times, meaning he was reciting astaghfar, he was asking Allah for forgiveness several hundred times every day. And that's a whole different discussion as far as why did the Prophet need to do istighfar when he didn't commit sins. But the same principle applies to us, is that it's a constant reminder of our shortcomings. And it's a constant reminder that we can never do enough to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's always room for improvement and room for moving forward. The next thing, the advice number 5, Imam Askari alayhi salam mentions, wa kadhmul ghayz, is I advise you to restrain your anger. We all get angry. We all get upset about different situations, whether it's with my family, whether it's with my children, whether it's with my spouse, whether it's with my coworkers, whether it's some person who cuts me off on the highway while I'm driving, whether it's someone who cut in line at the grocery store, whether it's someone who failed to keep their commitment. We all become angry in different situations. And I say this to myself before I say this to anyone else, is that in those situations, the most important thing to keep in mind is that we should not let that anger cause us to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Becoming upset in certain situations is natural, but if now I become so upset that I belittle someone, if I curse at someone, if I backbite and do ghibat of someone, if I say insulting things to a person, that's where the red line comes in. Is that as much as we can, we have to restrain our anger, but when the anger does happen, which is only natural in a lot of situations, then that anger should not lead us to any sort of haram action, anything that is disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The 6th piece of advice that Imam Askari mentions, he says, wasilat al-raham, is that maintain ties with your family members. Don't break ties with your family members. And we have numerous traditions on this topic. And we have the narration which says that the lifespan of the person who doesn't do silat al-raham, their lifespan is shortened. And now there's even scientific research to back this up. There was an article in the BBC I read a few years ago, which was talking about how people who don't have a good relationship with their family, they're expected to die earlier. And they had a whole scientific, this was had nothing to do with religion. It was a scientific study that they had done to show that people who don't have a good relationship with their family, it results in emotional issues, it results in loneliness, it results in anger, it results in blood pressure, all these problems. And consequently, those people die earlier. So there's a scientific correlation now between qat'ur rahim, breaking up ties with family members, and shortening your lifespan. And this is something that the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam told us 1400 years ago. The 7th piece of advice that the Imam gives is وَمَوَاسَاةُ الْأَخْوَانِ وَالسَّعِي فِي حَوَائِجِهِمْ فِي الْعَسْرِ وَالْيَسْرِ. He says, take care of your brothers and sisters in your community and strive to help them, put in effort to help them. وَالسَّعِي فِي حَوَائِجِهِمْ. Right? It doesn't just say help them. He says, put in effort. If I have to go through some hardship and difficulty to help my brothers and sisters in the community, that's what the Imam is expecting from us. And that's where we have to ask ourselves, when it comes to helping my brothers and sisters in the community, how much effort am I putting in? Donating some money in the sadaqah box, or now we're doing online sadaqah, that's easy and that's important. I'm not, astaghfirullah, not trying to take away from the importance of that. That's very important. But what if someone who needs help with something in their life? What if when someone gets sick? What if when someone needs a loan from us? What if someone, for example, needs help watching their kids? The Imam is saying, fil usri wal yusr. Be helpful to your brothers and sisters in the community during difficulty and in ease. Not just simply putting money in the box or donating money online. That's easy to do that. We have to go through effort. We have to put in hard work. We have to put in hours. We have to put in time and energy to help our brothers and sisters in the community. The Imam is saying, this is an expectation that I have from you. This is my wasiyah. This is my advice to you as my Shias. Advice number 8, the Imam says, وَالْحِلْمْ عِنْدَ الْجَهْلِ. and to have hilm, have to have forbearance with those who are jahil. So when you see people, when people act ignorantly, when people behave with you in an ignorant, in a difficult, in a problematic manner, and you know you're right and you know they're wrong, even in that situation, the Imam says, have hilm, have forbearance, let it go, forgive them. Even if you're able to do something back to them, even if I'm able to punish them or act in retribution, hilm means that I don't retribute, I don't act against them, even when I am able to do so. To increase that capacity to ignore. We have to increase that capacity, that wus'at qalb, to tolerate the shortcomings of others. Otherwise, we'll be miserable. We'll be miserable in our lives if we can't ignore and tolerate people who disappoint us or who do things to make us upset. The ninth piece of advice that the Imam gives is وَاتَّفَقَّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. I advise you to have tafaqqah, to have deep understanding in your religion. And that's a question for all of us to ask, is how much time do I dedicate to my Islamic learning? How much time do I give to reading books on Islamic topics? 20, 30 years ago, we had an excuse that books are only in Arabic and Farsi and Urdu. Now, if you go on alislam.org, they have, second, third year Hawza level books, textbooks available in English for us. Entire tafasir of the Quran, entire biographies of the Ma'asumeen, entire books on the history of the prophets and the imams, entire risalas of the majlis, everything is available online for free in English. So now we don't have any excuses to say that I don't have time for, or I don't have the resources available for me to increase my understanding of my religion. This is what the Imam is expecting. Remember that this letter is going to Ali ibn Abi al-Qawmi, who was a faqih, but it's to Jami'a Shi'atina. This is for all of our Shia. This is for all of our followers. The Imam is saying, I expect all of you, all of my followers, to have tafaqahu fi din, to have a deep understanding of your religion and not just a superficial and simple understanding of our religion. The next thing that the Imam mentions was tathabbit fil umur, and to be firm-footed in your affairs. Don't be wishy-washy. When you take on a project, when you take on an endeavor, then stay put with it. Work hard, stay committed, and get it done. Don't just, be wishy-washy and say, oh, I'm going to drop this. I don't have time for this. I don't want to do this anymore. It's just this little project, that little project, and never complete anything. The Imam says, no, be firm in your affairs and complete these things that you start. Number 11, the Imam says, وَالْتَعَهُدْ لِلْقُرْآنِ, is to have commitment to the Quran. We've talked about this before, only a few weeks ago, with the Shahadat of Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. And it's always a good reminder for us to reevaluate. What is my commitment like to the Quran? Imam Askari is not just saying recite the Quran. He's saying have a commitment to the Quran. How often do I read the Quran? How much time do I put into understanding the Quran? If I have to make a decision in my life, do I base it on my whims and my desires, or do I base it on the Quran, on the instructions of Allah in the Quran? And especially, in the winter time, it's a good time to do this. It's cold, we're stuck at home, there's nothing to do, there's nowhere to go. As much as we can, we should use and take advantage of this time and recite Quran as much as we can. The 12th piece of advice that the Imam gives, there's 15, so we have 3 more. The Imam says is وَحُسْنُ الْخُلْقِ, is to have good akhlaq with the people, is to behave kindly and nicely and politely with others. And we've talked about this many, many times before. The famous saying of the Prophet, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ, I was not sent for any other purpose. The Prophet is saying there was no other reason for me being sent except one, which is makarim al-akhlaq, is to perfect your akhlaq, is to teach you and to be a great example for you on your akhlaq. Number 13, the Imam says, وَالْأَمْرُ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَنَهِي عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ, and enjoin good and forbid evil. And then the Imam quotes that verse of the Quran, which is referring to Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy Munkar. And again, there's unfortunately another issue that is disappearing for our communities. This Western concept of mind your own business. Don't say anything to others. Let them do whatever they want. This is very, very dangerous. And this is something that Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam warned in his last will. He says, I know I've mentioned this many, many times before, and it's really relevant for us tonight as you watch, I think it's happening at the same time, as you watch these two clowns debating each other, and you wonder, of the 300 million people in this country, this is the choice that we have been given. Why? One of the reasons is Amir al-Mu'mineen, what he told us in his last wasiyat. He said, never stop doing Amr bil Ma'ruf or Nahi al-Munkar, or the worst among you will become your rulers. If you stop doing Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi al-Munkar, if you stop enjoining good and evil, then the worst people among you will become in charge of you, will become your rulers and your leaders. So if you're wondering tonight when you watch the debate and why these kind of jokers, I don't know, I think it's a presidential debate tonight or the vice presidential, but either way, when you watch these people debate with each other and you wonder, how did this happen where we have come to this point where this is the choice that we are given? It's because of this mind your own business culture. This culture that took out Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi al-Munkar completely, and slowly society has devolved and gone down and further low and low and low. Asfal as-safilin to darak al-jahim, all these lower levels, to the point where now the worst human being that you can imagine, the person who embodies the worst characteristics of Western society, is now the leader of this society. The 14th piece of advice that the Imam gives is وَاجْتِنَابَ الْفَوَاحِشْ كُلُّهَا. The Imam says, stay away from indecencies. I know we've talked about this before, but it's an important reminder for myself and for everyone, especially right now. It's winter, it's starting to get cold, and we're in quarantine, we're in this pandemic, there's not a whole lot of stuff to do. You can't really go outside, we have these long nights. So we have people doing what? We're spending unnecessary amount of time on streaming services. Whether it's Netflix, whether it's Hulu, Amazon Prime, Disney Plus, HBO, whatever, all the different services that are out there. I'm not saying any of these is haram. It's not haram. There was actually a whole issue about this. They even asked Sayyid Sistani this question, and he said having the service, having Netflix is not haram. But obviously the content, you have to be mindful of. The haram content you have to avoid. The halal content is permissible. But it's very important for us to be cautious about this. Some of the filth that is pervasive on these platforms is mind-boggling. And even more mind-boggling than that are the number of Shias and the number of followers of Ahlul Bayt, alayhimus salam, the Mu'mineen, the Shi'atu Ali, who think it is acceptable to watch this type of content. Oh yeah, it has a really good storyline. It's so interesting. Look at the amazing graphics and the CGI and the effects that they have, and how informative it is from a historical perspective. Okay, yeah, it might have all those things, but guess what? It also has nudity. It's softcore pornography. It's inappropriate to even say this in a majlis. But that's the reality of what's out there, and that's the reality of what mu'mineen are watching these days. I watch it with my wife, so it's okay. I've heard this excuse from people. This is hard to even fathom how this becomes acceptable. We're the followers of Bibi Zainab Salamullah alayha. We're the followers of that lady who had that thought in her mind when her tents were set on fire, that do I stay and burn inside these tents, or do I go outside without my hijab? We're the followers of Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas alayhi salam, the person that we mourn for, the one whose head would keep falling from the spear from Karbala to Kufa and Kufa to Sham, because he couldn't bear to see that his sister and his family members were brought without hijab in public. That's how much ghayrat, that's how much dignity and self-respect these people had. What has happened to the ghayrat of the Shias of Amir al-Mu'mineen? How can we ever justify exposing our minds and our souls to this kind of filth? There's a statement from Imam Khomeini rahmatullah alayhi where he says that one, not 30 minutes, not an hour, one single inappropriate look at a na-mahram is enough to set you back 10 years spiritually. Now imagine watching 5 seasons, 7 seasons of this filth on Netflix or these services. What is that going to do to us? What is that going to do as far as shattering and completely destroying our iman? That's the 14th piece of advice that Imam Askari gives us, is وَاجْتِنَابَ الْفَوَاحِشْ كُلِّهَا, is to stay away from all sorts of indecency, stay away from all sorts of fahsha, all sorts of immoral behavior. And especially right now, we're stuck at home, nothing to do. We have to be very careful how much time we're spending on these streaming services and what kind of content we are exposing ourselves to. And the last piece of advice that the Imam gives is he says, وَعَلَيْكَ بِالصَّلَاةِ اللَّيْلِ, and I enjoin upon you to perform your night prayer. And then he mentions this hadith of the Prophet. Inshallah, we will conclude with this. He says, فَإِنَّ النَّبِي صلى الله عليه وآله أوصى عليا عليه السلام. He says that the Prophet, when he was passing away, he gave this wasiyat to Imam Ali alayhi salam, and he says, فَقَالَ يَا عَلِي عَلَيْكَ بِالصَّلَاةِ اللَّيْلِ عَلَيْكَ بِالصَّلَاةِ اللَّيْلِ عَلَيْكَ بِالصَّلَاةِ اللَّيْلِ. The Prophet said to Imam Ali 3 times, "Oh Ali, do the night prayer, do the night prayer, do the night prayer." And then the Prophet said to Imam Ali, وَمَنِ اسْتَخَفَّ بِصَلَاةِ اللَّيْلِ فَلَيْسَ مِنَّا. The one who neglects their namaz-e-shab, the one who disregards and doesn't give importance to their night prayer, then that person is not from among us, is not from among our followers. And this issue of the night prayer, the Salatul Layl, it is the solution to everything. If you want your risk to increase, if you're having financial problems, the answer is night prayer. If you want to stay away from sins and control your desires, the answer is night prayer. If you want your hajat answered, your wishes granted, the answer is night prayer. If you want to succeed in school, the answer is night prayer. If you want to get married soon, the answer is night prayer. If you don't even care about all these things, if you just want to look more beautiful and be more good looking, the answer is night prayer. We have narrations which say that the person who performs Salatul Layl, then that person, Allah beautifies their face and they have this nur on their face all the time. And we all know how to perform night prayer. We can look in the books. I don't want to spend time going through that. But I just want to mention that particularly in the winter is a good time to start. Because in the summers, when Fajr is 4 in the morning, it's difficult. But right now, Fajr time is almost at 6 a.m. You can wake up 15 minutes early and get into this habit of doing Salatul Layl. If I can't do every day, I can do it once a week. If I can't do the whole 11 rakat, I can skip the 8 rakats of nawafil and just at least do the 2 rakats of shaf and 1 rakat of watr. Even if I cannot do that, then I can just do the 1 rakat of watr. And in that 1 rakat of witr, you can skip the qunut, you can skip the 48 istighfar for mu'mineen, you can skip all these other things. You just do Surah Fatiha, 3 times Qul Huwallah, Falaq and Nas, Ruku, Sujood, and that's it. 2-3 minutes is all it takes to do the bare minimum of namaz-e-shab. Inshallah, we start with that and then slowly expand and start to do the full namaz-e-shab, to do the shaf, to do the 8 rakats of nawafil, and then inshallah it becomes a regular habit. And one final convenience in this issue, especially for the muqallideen of Sayyid Sistani, I'm not sure about the other maraj, but according to Ayatollah Sistani, you can do your namaz-e-shab right after Isha prayer. So he has a ruling which makes it very easy. You don't have to wait till middle of the night, or you don't have to wait right before Fajr to do your night prayer. According to Sayyid Sistani, as soon as you're done with your Isha prayer, which right now is at 6:30 in the evening, you can do the namaz-e-shab right after that. So you don't even have to worry about waking up early for namaz-e-shab. So the Imam gives these 15 pieces of advice, and then he says to Ali ibn Babi al-Qummi, he says, فَعْمَلْ بِوَصِيَّتِي, so act according to my wasiyah, act according to my advice. And he says, وَأَمُرْ جَمِيعَ شِيَعَتِي حَتَّى يَعْمَلُوا عَلَيْهِ, and tell my Shias that they should also act according to his advice. وَعَلَيْكَ بِالصَّبْرِ وَالْإِنْتِظَارِ الْفَرَجِ, and the Imam says that I enjoin upon you to have patience and to await the faraj, actively await, prepare for the reappearance of my son, because that is going to be the solution for all of your problems. And the end, the Imam provides consolation, especially, with everything that's going on in the world right now, with all the violence, the bloodshed. You read the news, you become depressed. This grief will not end, unfortunately. There's only one way that it will end, and that's where the Imam says, وَلَا يَزَالُ شِيعَتِنَا فِي حُزْنِ حَتَّى يَظْهَرُ وَلَدِي الَّذِي بَشَّرَ بِهِ النَّبِي صلى الله عليه وآله إِنَّهُ يَمْلَأُ الْأَرْضَ عَدْلًا وَقِسْطًا كَمَا مُلِئَ ظُلْمًا وَجَوْرًا. He says the sorrow and the grief for our Shias will not end until my son reappears, the one that the Prophet has promised that he will fill the earth with justice and equity as it has been filled. كَمَا مُلِئَتْ ظُلْمًا وَجَوْرًا فَاصْبِرْ يَا شَيْخِي, O my Shaykh, therefore have patience. This advice is especially particular for us in Akhir Zaman. فَاصْبِرْ يَا شَيْخِي, O my Shaykh, have patience through all of these trials and difficulties. وَأَمُرْ جَمِيعَ الشِّيعَةِ بِالصَّبْرِ, and tell my Shias to also have patience. فَإِنَّ الْأَرْضَ لِلَّهِ, because this earth, it belongs to Allah. It doesn't belong to these oppressors and these zalimeen. يُورِثُهَا مَنْ يَشَاءُ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ. And at the end, Allah will allow this earth to be inherited by His righteous servants. وَالْعَاقِبَةُ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. And at the end, the victory and salvation, the righteous will be the ones who will be victorious at the end. Wassalamu alayka wa ala jami'i shi'atina wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh wa hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakil, ni'mal mawla wa ni'mal nasir. The Imam gives his last salams and he says, give my salams not only to you, but give my salams to all of my Shias, and Allah is sufficient for us, and Allah is the best helper and the best assistant and aid for us for all of our difficulties. Of course, there's much more to be said, but in the interest of time, inshallah, we conclude that may Allah give us the perseverance and the patience, and may Allah give patience and perseverance to the Shias of the Ahlul Bayt in Iraq, in Iran, in Bahrain, in Afghanistan, in Nigeria, in Pakistan, in Kashmir, and everywhere else in the world. And we ask Allah to let us see the day that the earth will be inherited by His righteous servants, as promised in the Quran, and as Imam Askari is telling us. Sallallahu alayka Ya Aba Muhammad, Ya Hasan ibn Ali, Ayyuha Zakiyul Askari, Ya ibn Rasulillah, Ya Hujjat Allah ala khalqih. We're marking tonight the shahadat of our 11th Imam, alayhi salatu wassalam. This Imam who began his life in Mazlumiyat, who lived his whole life in oppression, and eventually he became shaheed as a Mazlum. Despite the government's pressure and despite the house arrest, they were constantly afraid of Imam Askari alayhi salam and how his influence was growing among the people. It is said in the month of Rabiul Awwal in the year 260, the Abbasid rulers could no longer bear to see the Imam spreading knowledge and wisdom to the people. So they decided to poison him. The Imam was slowly tortured by the poison. He suffered for days, and then eventually on the 8th of Rabiul Awwal, the Imam departed this world. A caller goes out and he announces through the streets of Samarra that Abu Muhammad has passed away, that Imam al-Askari is no longer among us anymore. The narration says that the entire city of Samarra came out for the funeral of Imam Askari. The people were mourning in the street, they were crying, they were weeping for the loss of this noble and generous and kind personality. They came to the family of Imam Askari and paid their respects. They offered their sympathies and they gave their condolences. Azamallahu lakumul ajr. May Allah reward you for your mourning. Please accept our condolences on the passing of Abu Muhammad. The family of Imam Askari was weeping. The brother, the wife, the mother of Imam Askari were weeping, and the people were offering their condolences. But I am reminded of another scene of condolences, one that is much more painful and much more difficult. On these same days of Rabiul Awwal, the people of Medina heard a caller. They heard the voice of Bishr calling through the streets of Medina, Ya Ahla Yathrab la maqama lakum biha. قتل الحسين فأدمعي مدرار. الجسم منه بكربلاء مضرج والرأس منه على القناة يضار. O people of Yathrib, the city is no longer fit to live. Hussein has been killed in Karbala. His body was left on the plains and his head was paraded through the cities on a spear. When the people of Medina hear this, they rush out toward the outskirts of the city to pay their respects. Muhammad Hanafiya, the half-brother of Imam Hussein, hears this news and he comes out to meet his family. He finds the caravan and he sees an old man whose back is bent and whose hair is white. He says to him, old man, I'm looking for my nephew Ali ibn al-Hussein. The man looks back at him and he says, oh my uncle Muhammad Hanafiya, Ana Ali ibn al-Hussein, I am your nephew Sajjad. Muhammad Hanafiya begins to cry and he says, but you're only 24 years of age. Why is your back broken and your hair is white? Imam Sajjad looks at his uncle and he says, Asham, Asham, Asham. The narration says that the first thing Bibi Zainab does is she goes to the house of Imam Hussein. She goes inside the house of her brother Imam Hussein and she sits there. And she tells one of the servants, don't let anyone come inside. A little while later, there's a knock on the door. Bibi Zainab says, who is it? They say it is Bibi Baneen. Bibi Baneen has come to offer her condolences. Bibi Zainab stands up when she sees Bibi Baneen. She begins to cry and she says, Ya Ummah, oh my brother, oh my mother. She used to always call Bibi Baneen as her mother. She hugs her, she puts her arms around her, and she begins to cry, and she says, Wa Akha, Wa Abbasa. Oh, my brother Abbas, he was killed in Karbala. Bibi Baneen hugs Zainab back, and she also begins to cry, and she says, Wa Walada, Wa Husaina. Oh, my son Hussein, he was killed in Karbala. ألا ولعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. Ya Hussein.
या हुसैन, रोजे पे मुस्तफा की उदासी सी छाई है, कुनबे को खो के ज़ैनब नाशाद आई है। रोजे पे मुस्तफा के उदासी सी छाई है, कुनबे को खो के ज़ैनब नाशाद आई है। नाना अजीब सा नए हम पर गुजर गए, रंजो अलम ने घेर लिया हम जिधर गए। नाना खुदा के घर में ना हमको अमा मिली, भाई ने शहर छोड़ के जंगल की राह ली। रोजे पे मुस्तफा के उदासी सी छाई है, कुनबे को खो के ज़ैनब नाशाद आई है। नाना हमारे घर का सब असबाब लुट गया, नाना हमारे सर पे ना बाकी रही रिदा। नाना हजार तरह जफा की लाइनों ने, खैमों में हाय आग लगा दी लाइनों ने। रोजे पे मुस्तफा के उदासी सी छाई है, कुनबे को खो के ज़ैनब नाशाद आई है। नाना शहीद हो गए भाई के जानसार, एक एक करके मर गए असहाबे जी वकार। नाना बला के बन में कयामत का रन पड़ा, भाई से भाई बाप से बेटा बिछड़ गया। रोजे पे मुस्तफा के उदासी सी छाई है, कुनबे को खो के ज़ैनब नाशाद आई है। नाना जमीन करबो बला लाल हो गई, कासिम की लाश घोड़ों से पामाल हो गई। नाना कटा के शानों को अब्बास मर गए, गुर्बत में भाई जान को बेआस कर गए। रोजे पे मुस्तफा के उदासी सी छाई है, कुनबे को खो के ज़ैनब नाशाद आई है। नाना असीर 12 थे और एक थी रसन, बांधे गए थे मिसले गुनागार खस्ता तन। नाना हम अपने हाल पे रोते थे बार बार, नाना हमारे हाल पे हंसते थे बदशयार। रोजे पे मुस्तफा के उदासी सी छाई है, कुनबे को खो के ज़ैनब नाशाद आई है। रोजे पे मुस्तफा के उदासी सी छाई है, कुनबे को खो के ज़ैनब नाशाद आई है। या हुसैन।
बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम। आजरक अल्लाह या बक़ियत अल्लाह। नाले آقامون امشب بی امونه، اشک چشمش جاری میشه روی گونه، با دلی پر از غم و قلبی شکسته، روزه قربت بابا رو میخونه. ای پدر جان، ای پدر جان، از غمت قلبم کباب ای پدر جان، زندگی بی تو عذاب ای پدر جان، جگرت تشنه آب وای از این غم، مهدی امشب بی قرار وای از این غم، چشم او ابر بهار وای از این غم، که دیگه بابا نداره، زهر کینه سوی چشماشو گرفته، رمق و توان دستاشو گرفته، جگرش از تشنگی میسوزه آقا، خشکی و کبودی لبهاشو گرفته، ما اماما از لبانش خون روونه، وا اماما یاد جدش روز خونه، وا اماما یاد چوب خیزرونه، وای از این غم، مهدی امشب بی قراره، وای از این غم، چشم او ابر بهاره، وای از این غم، که دیگه بابا نداره. گرچه آقا سامرا دور از وطن بود، جای شکرش باقیه که با کفن بود، اما لا یوم که یومک ای حسین جان، کربلا سهم تو کنه پیرهن بود. گرچه آقا سامرا دور از وطن بود، جای شکرش باقیه که با کفن بود، اما لایم که یوم که ای حسین جان، کربلا سهم تو کنه پیرهن بود. وا حسینا بی کفن 100 بار پیکر، وا حسینا از قفا بریده خنجر، وا حسینا جانم ای غریب مادر، وا حسینا بی کفن 100 بار پیکر، وا حسینا از قفا برید خنجر، وا حسینا جانم ای غریب مادر، آجرک الله بقیت الله، آجرک الله بقیت الله، آجرک الله بقیت الله. السلام عليكم يا حسن بن علي أيها الأسكري يا ابن رسول الله، يا حجة الله على خلقه، يا سيدنا ومولانا، إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله، وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا، يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله، يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله. برای شادی همه گذشتگان، به خصوص آقای حسن عطایی، رحم الله من یقرأ الفاتحة مع الصلوات.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء وبقوتك التي قهرت بها كل شيء وخضع لها كل شيء وذل لها كل شيء وبجبروتك التي غلبت بها كل شيء وبعزتك التي لا يقوم لها شيء وبعظمتك التي ملأت كل شيء وبسلطانك الذي على كل شيء وبوجهك الباقي بعد فناء كل شيء وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء وبعلمك الذي أحاط بكل شيء وبنور وجهك الذي أضاء له كل شيء يا نور يا قدوس يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تهتك العصام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل النقام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تغير النعم. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحبس الدعاء. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء. اللهم اغفر لي كل ذنب أذنبته وكل خطيئة أخطأتها. اللهم إني أتقرب إليك بذكرك وأستشفع بك إلى نفسك وأسألك بجودك أن تدنيني من قربك وأن توزعني شكرك وأن تلهمني ذكرك. اللهم إني أسألك سؤال خاضع متذلل خاشع أن تسامحني وترحمني وتجعلني بقسمك راضيا قانعا وفي جميع الأحوال متواضعا. اللهم وأسألك سؤال من اشتدت فاقته وأنزل بك عند الشدائد حاجته وعظم فيما عندك رغبته. اللهم عظم سلطانك وأعلى مكانك وخفي مكرك وظهر أمرك وغلب قهرك وجرت قدرتك ولا يمكن الفرار من حكومتك. اللهم لا أجد لذنوبي غافرا ولا لقبائحي ساترا ولا لشيء من عملي القبيح بالحسن مبدلا غيرك. لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك وبحمدك ظلمت نفسي وتجرأت بجهلي وسكنت إلى قديم ذكرك لي ومنك علي. اللهم مولاي كم من قبيح سترته وكم من فادح من البلاء أقلته وكم من عثار وقيته وكم من مكروه دفعته وكم من ثناء جميل لست أهلا له نشرته. اللهم عظم بلائي وأفرت بي سوء حالي وقصرت بي أعمالي وقعدت بي أغلالي وحبسني عن نفعي بعد أملي وخدعتني الدنيا بغرورها ونفسي بجنايتها ومثالي يا سيدي فأسألك بعزتك ألا يحجب عنك دعائي سوء عملي وفعالي ولا تفضحني بخفي ما اطلعت عليه من سري ولا تعاجلني بالعقوبة على ما عملته في خلواتي من سوء فعلي وإساءتي ودوام تفريطي وجهالتي وكثرة شهواتي وغفلتي وكن اللهم بعزتك لي في كل الأحوال رؤوفا وعلي في جميع الأمور عطوفا إلهي وربي من لي غيرك أسأله كشف ضري والنذر في أمري إلهي ومولاي أجريت علي حكما اتبعت فيه هوى نفسي ولم أحترس فيه من تزيين عدوي فغرني بما أهوى فأسعده على ذلك الغضاء فتجاوزت بما جرى علي من ذلك بعد حدودك وخالفت بعد أوامرك فلك الحمد علي في جميع ذلك ولا حجة لي فيما جرى علي فيه قضاؤك وألزمني حكمك وبلاؤك وقد أتيتك يا إلهي بعد تقصيري وإسرافي على نفسي معتذرا نادما منكسرا مستغيلا مستغفرا منيبا مقرا مذعنا معترفا لا أجد مفرا مما كان مني ولا مفزعا أتوجه إليه في أمري غير قبولك عذري وإدخالك إياي في سعة رحمتك اللهم فاقبل عذري وارحم شدة ضري وفكني من شد وثاقي يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني
ورقة جلدي ودقة عظمي يا من بدأ خلقي وذكري وتربيتي وبري وتغذيتي هبني لابتداء كرمك وسالف برك بي يا إلهي وسيدي وربي أتراك معذبي بنارك بعد توحيدك وبعد من طوى عليه قلبي من معرفتك ولهج به لساني من ذكرك واعتقده ضميري من حبك وبعد صدق اعترافي ودعائي خاضعا لربوبيتك هيهات أنت أكرم من أن تضيع من ربيت أو تبعد من أدنيت أو تشرد من آويت أو تسلم إلى البلاء من كفيته ورحمت وليت شعري يا سيدي وإلهي ومولاي أتسلط النار على وجوه خرت لعظمتك ساجدا وعلى ألسن نطقت بتوحيدك صادقا وبشكرك مادحا وعلى قلوب اعترفت بإلهيتك محققا وعلى ضمائر حوت من العلم بك حتى صارت خاشعة، وعلى جوارح سعت إلى أوطان تعبدك طائعة، وأشارت باستغفارك مذعنها ما هكذا الظن بك، ولا أخبرنا بفضلك عنك يا كريم يا رب. وأنت تعلم ضعفي قليلا من بلاء الدنيا وعقوباتها وما يجري فيها من المكاره على أهلها، على أن ذلك بلاء ومكروه قليل مكثوم يسير بقاؤه قصير مدته، فكيف احتمالي لبلاء الآخرة وجليل وقوع المكاره فيها وهو بلاء تطول مدته ويدوم مقامه ولا يخفف عن أهله، لأنه لا يكون إلا عن غضبك وانتقامك وسخطك، وهذا ما لا تقوم له السماوات والأرض يا سيدي. فكيف لي وأنا عبدك الضعيف الذليل الحقير المسكين المستكين، يا إلهي وربي وسيدي ومولاي، لي الأمور إليك أشكو ولما منها ضج بك، لأليم العذاب وشدته أم لطول البلاء ومدته، فلئن سيرتني للعقوبات مع أعدائك وجمعت بيني وبين أهل بلائك وفرقت بيني وبين أحبائك وأوليائك، فهبني يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي وربي. صبرت على عذابك فكيف أصبر على فراقك، وهبني صبرت على حر نارك فكيف أصبر عن النظر إلى كرامتك، أم كيف أسكن في النار ورجائي يفوق، فبعزتك يا سيدي ومولاي أقسم صادقا لئن تركتني ناطقا لأذجن إليك بين أهل ضجيج العاملين ولأصرخن إليك صراخ المستصرخين ولأبكين عليك بكاء الفاقدين ولأنادينك أين كنت يا ولي المؤمنين يا غاية آمال العارفين يا غياث المستغيثين يا غياث المستغيثين يا غياث المستغيثين يا حبيب قلوب الصادقين ويا إله العالمين، أفتراك سبحانك يا إلهي وبحمدك تسمع فيها صوت عبد مسلم سجن فيها بمخالفته وذاق طعم عذابها بمعصيته وحبس بين أطباقها بجرمه وجريرته، وهو يذج إليك ذجيج مؤمل رحمتك ويناديك بلسانه لتوحيدك ويتوسل إليك بربوبيتك يا مولاي. فكيف يبقى في العذاب وهو يرجو ما سلف من حلمك، أم كيف تؤلمه النار وهو يأمل فضلك ورحمتك، أم كيف يحرقه لهيبها وأنت تسمع صوته وترى مكانه، أم كيف يشتمل عليه زفيرها وأنت تعلم ضعفه، أم كيف يتغلغل بين أطباقها وأنت تعلم صدقها، أم كيف تزجره زبانيتها وهو يناديك يا رب، أم كيف يرجو فضلك في عتقه منها فتتركه فيها، هيهات ما ذلك الظن بك ولا المعروف من فضلك ولا مشبه لما عاملت به الموحدين من برك وإحسانك، فباليقين أقطع لولا ما حكمت به من تعذيب جاحديك وقضيت به من إخلاد معانديك لجعلت النار كلها بردا وسلاما وما كان لأحد فيها مغرا ولا مقاما لكنك تقدست أسماؤك أقسمت أن تملأها من الكافرين من الجنة والناس أجمعين وأن تخلد فيها المعاندين وأن تجل ثناؤك قلت مبتدعا وتطولت بالإنعام متكرما أفمن كان مؤمنا كمن كان فاسقا لا يستوون إلهي وسيدي فأسألك بالقدرة التي قدرتها بالقضية التي حتمتها وحكمتها وغلبت من عليه أجريتها أن تهب لي في هذه الليلة وفي هذه الساعة كل جرم أجرمته وكل ذنب أذنبته وكل قبيح أسررته وكل جهل عملته كتمته أو أعلنته أخفيته أو أظهرته وكل سيئة أمرت بإثباتها الكرام الكاتبين الذين وكلتهم بحفظ ما يكون مني وجعلتهم شهودا علي مع جوارحي وكنت أنت الرقيب علي من ورائهم والشاهد لما خفي عنهم وبرحمتك أخفيته وبفضلك سترته وأن توفر حظي من كل خير أنزلته أو إحسان فضلته أو بر نشرته أو رزق بسطته أو ذنب تغفره أو خطأ تستره يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي ومالك رقي يا من بيده ناصيتي يا عليما بضري ومسكنتي يا خبيرا بفقري وفاقتي يا ربي يا ربي يا رب أسألك بحقك وقدسك وأعظم صفاتك واسمائك أن تجعل أوقاتي من الليل والنهار بذكرك معمورة وبخدمتك موصولة وأعمالي عندك مقبولة حتى تكون أعمالي وأورادي كلها وردا واحدا وحالي في خدمتك سرمدا يا سيدي يا من عليه معولي يا من إليه شكوت أحوالي يا رب يا رب يا رب قو على خدمتك جوارحي واشدد على العزيمة جوانحي وابلي الجد في خشيتك والدوام في الاتصال بخدمتك حتى أسرح إليك في ميادين السابقين وأسرع إليك في البارزين واشتاق إلى قربك في المشتاقين وأدنو منك دنو المخلصين وأخافك مخافة الموقنين واجتمع في جوارك مع المؤمنين مع أمير المؤمنين اللهم ومن أرادني بسوء فأرد ومن كادني فكد واجعلني من أحسن عبيدك نصيبا عندك واغربهم منزلة منك وأخصهم زلفة لديك فإنه لا ينال ولو ذلك إلا بفضلك وجد لي بجودك واعطف علي بمجدك واحفظني برحمتك واجعل لساني بذكرك لهجا وقلبي بحبك متيما ومن علي بحسن إجابتك وأغلني عثرتي واغفر زلتي، فإنك غضيت على عبادك بعبادتك وأمرتهم بدعائك وضمنت لهم الإجابة. فإليك يا رب نصبت وجهي، وإليك يا رب مددت يدي، فبعزتك استجب لي دعائي، فبلغني مناي ولا تقطع من فضلك رجائي، واكفني شر الجن والإنس من أعدائي. يا سريع الرضا اغفر لمن لا يملك إلا الدعاء، فإنك فعال لما تشاء. يا من اسمه دواء وذكره شفاء وطاعته غنى، ارحم من رأس ماله الرجاء وسلاحه البكاء. يا سابق النعم، يا دافع النقم، يا نور المستوحشين في الظلم، يا عالما لا يعلم، صل على محمد وآل محمد وافعل بما أنت أهله، وصلى الله على رسوله والأئمة الميامين من آله وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا. على محمد وآل محمد صلوات. Inshallah, let us all do Amman Yujib together. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء، 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 أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء. Inshallah, my apologies. I preempted the Amman Yujib. It comes after the Ziyarat Waris. Usually, inshallah, we will continue with the Ziyarat Waris alayhi salam.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thursday night, the special night for the Ziyarat of Agha Abdullah alayhi salam. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alayka ya Warith Adam Safmatullah. Assalamu alayka ya Warith Nuh al-Nabi Allah. Assalamu alayka ya Warith Ibrahim Khalil Allah. Assalamu alayka ya Warith Musa Kalim Allah. Assalamu alayka ya Warith Isa Ruh Allah. Assalamu alayka ya Warith Muhammadan Habib Allah. Assalamu alayka ya Warith Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi assalam. Assalamu alayka ya ibn Muhammad al-Mustafa. السلام عليك يا ابن علي المرتضى. السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة الزهراء. السلام عليك يا ابن خديجة الكبرى. السلام عليك يا ثار الله وابن ثار واللتر الموتون. أشهد أنك قد أقمت الصلاة وآتيت الزكاة وأمرت بالمعروف ونهيت عن المنكر وأطعت الله ورسوله واتاك اليقين. فلعن الله أمة قتلت، ولعن الله أمة ظلمت، ولعن الله أمة سمعت بذلك فرضيت به. يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله، أشهد أنك كنت نورا في الأسناب الشامخة والأرحام المطهرة، لم تنجسك الجاهلية بأنجاسها، ولم تلبسك من مدلهمات ثيابها، وأشهد أنك من دعائم الدين وأركان المؤمنين، وأشهد أنك الإمام البر التقي الرضي الزكي الغادر المهدي، وأشهد أن الأئمة من ملك كلمة التقوى وأعلام الهدى والعروة الوثقى والهجة على أهل الدنيا، وأشهد الله وملائكته وأنبياءه ورسله أني بكم مؤمن وبأيامكم موقن بشرائع ديني وخواتيم عملي، وقلبي لقلبكم سيل وأمري لأمركم متبع. صلوات الله عليكم وعلى أرواحكم وعلى أجسادكم وعلى أجسامكم وعلى شاهدكم وعلى غائبكم وعلى ظاهركم وعلى باطنكم بأبي أنت وأمي يا ابن رسول الله، بأبي أنت وأمي يا أبا عبد الله. لقد عظمت الرزية وجلت المصيبة بك علينا وعلى جميع أهل السماوات والأرض، فلعن الله أمة أسرجت والجمال وتهيأت لقتالك يا مولاه يا أبا عبد الله. أسأل الله بالشأن الذي لك عنده وبالمال الذي لك لدي أن يصلي على محمد وآل محمد، وأن يجعلني معكم في الدنيا والآخرة. رحم الله من يقرأ الفاتحة مع الصلوات.